The War of the Rings. In an age long before the rise of kings and the fall of empires, the world was shaped by the struggle of an ancient and powerful force, the Rings of Power, forged in the fires of Mount Doom by the Dark Lord, Sauron. The rings were created to dominate all of Middle-earth, but even as Sauron wielded his malevolent power, the world was far from helpless. Great realms, kingdoms, and alliances arose to oppose him, each with their own ring of power, crafted in secret by the wise and the cunning. It began in the land of Eregion, where the elven smiths, led by Celebrimbor, forged 3 rings of power, the rings of the elves. These rings were created with a purpose, to preserve the beauty and wisdom of the elven realms, free from the corrupting influence of Sauron. Unbeknownst to Celebrimbor, however, Sauron had already forged his own dark ring, the One Ring, which he intended to use to control the others and bend all races to his will. The War of the Rings truly began when Sauron waged his first great war for dominance. With the One Ring, he swept across Middle-earth, conquering kingdoms and enslaving peoples. The free nations of Middle-earth, led by men, elves, and dwarves, rose to oppose him. In a series of bloody battles, Sauron's forces of orcs, trolls, and monstrous creatures clashed with the armies of the free peoples, while the ring-bearers, each with their own powerful artifact, fought to prevent Sauron from claiming total dominion. In the north, the kingdom of Arnor was the first to fall, its people broken and scattered under the relentless march of Sauron's armies. The Ring of the North, one of the 7 rings of the dwarves, was lost to time. In the west, the elven kingdoms of Lothlorien and Rivendell stood firm, guided by the wisdom of their leaders, Galadriel and Elrond. Their rings, the Ring of Water and the Ring of Air, kept their lands untouched by Sauron's corruption, but they could not stop the coming storm. The most crucial battle took place in the heart of Mordor, where the fate of Middle-earth would be decided. The armies of men, elves, and dwarves, led by a coalition of their greatest heroes, marched on the Black Gate of Mordor. At the head of this alliance was Aragorn, the rightful heir to the throne of Gondor, a kingdom which had long resisted Sauron's influence. By his side was Gandalf, the Grey Wizard, whose knowledge of ancient lore and magic helped guide the free peoples in their most desperate hours. In the depths of the land, far below the surface of Mount Doom, a small fellowship of unlikely heroes had a far more perilous mission. Frodo Baggins, a humble hobbit, was tasked with destroying the One Ring itself, together with his loyal friend Samwise Gamgee, the enigmatic Gollum, and a group of brave companions. Frodo ventured deep into the heart of darkness. They faced countless trials and betrayals, while Sauron's influence sought to corrupt their every step. As the War of the Rings raged on, the forces of darkness closed in on the final bastion of the free peoples, Gondor. In the ancient city of Minas Tirith, the last of the great human kingdoms, the final stand took place. With the help of the Riders of Rohan, led by King Theoden, and the arrival of Aragorn with his army of the dead, they broke Sauron's army at the gates. Yet, even as the battle raged, the fate of the world lay in the hands of Frodo and Sam, who was still deep within Mordor, struggling to destroy the One Ring. At the climax of the War of the Rings, Frodo's courage faltered. The ring's power was too great, and he claimed it for himself at the very edge of Mount Doom. In that moment, Gollum, driven by his obsession, attacked Frodo, biting off the ring and claiming it for his own. But in the chaos, Gollum fell into the fires of Mount Doom, and the One Ring was destroyed forever. Sauron's power was broken, his armies scattered, and his dark fortress of Mordor crumbled into dust. The War of the Rings came to an end, and Middle-earth entered a new age, a time of peace, rebuilding, and renewal. The Rings of Power were lost, and the memories of their once great influence faded into legend. Yet even in peace, there were whispers of the rings, and the fear that one day, in the shadow of forgotten ruins, they might rise again. But for now, Middle-earth was free, and the heroes of the War of the Rings lived on in stories and song, their legacy enduring in the hearts of those who would remember the greatest battle ever fought for the future of the world. And so, the War of the Rings ended, not with the conquering of realms, but with the courage of a few unlikely souls who dared to resist the power of the Dark Lord. The aftermath. The flames of war had finally died, and the scars of battle began to heal, but the cost had been great. The great cities of men lay in ruin, and the lands once rich with life were now barren and scarred by Sauron's dark touch. The ruins of Mordor stood as a grim reminder of the immense struggle that had brought about the downfall of the Dark Lord. Yet the end of Sauron did not mark the end of the world's trials, for in the absence of tyranny, there arose new challenges. new threats that the free peoples of Middle-earth would have to face together. Aragorn, now crowned King Elessar of Gondor, stood before the white tree in the heart of Minas Tirith, its blossoms symbolizing the renewal of hope. Yet even as he looked out over the fields of his ancestors, he knew that the work of rebuilding was only beginning. The death of Sauron had not erased the bitterness of centuries of war. Gondor, though victorious, had lost much, and there were still the wounds of division and distrust between the kingdoms of men. But Aragorn's heart remained steadfast. With the aid of Legolas, the elven prince, and Gimli, the dwarf, both of whom had forged an unbreakable bond during the war, the kingdoms of men, elves, and dwarves began to mend the rifts of the past. Trade and alliance were re-established, old grievances set aside. The dwarves returned to Erebor, which had flourished under the protection of their king, Thorin's kin. Rivendell and Lothlorien, though diminished by the loss of their rings, still retained their beauty and grace, and in the depths of Mirkwood, a new hope began to grow as Thranduil's kingdom prospered once again. Yet the loss of the Rings of Power was not as clean as many had hoped. The remnants of their power lingered in the world, hidden in the forgotten corners of Middle-earth. The destruction of the One Ring had sent shockwaves across the lands, causing tremors in places where the ancient magic of the rings still had influence. Even as Aragorn sought to unite the free peoples, whispers of the Ring's return began to emerge in secret places. In the distant lands beyond the seas, the Valar, the powerful beings who once watched over Middle-earth, began to stir. The fall of Sauron had not been without cost to the very fabric of the world. The destruction of the One Ring had caused the weakening of the boundary between the realms of men and the lands of the immortals. Though many of the elves chose to sail to the Undying Lands, seeking peace and healing, others remained, torn between the lingering pain of the past and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Gandalf, having played his part in the Great War, withdrew into the forests of Middle-earth, contemplating the future of the world. As the White Wizard, his role had been one of guidance, but now there was no clear path. The war had been won, yet the real question remained, what now? The great battle against Sauron had been won, but there were still shadows in the world. Ancient evils, long thought banished, began to stir once again. In the farthest reaches of the east, in the lands untouched by the war, rumors spread of a new threat rising, a new Dark Lord, an ancient servant of Sauron, whose name had been lost in the mists of time, began to rally the remnants of Sauron's followers. His intentions were unknown, but it was said that he sought to reclaim the power of the rings, to forge new ones, and to renew the dark influence that had once ruled the lands. Though his armies were still small, the whispers of his growing power began to reach the ears of the Council of Elrond, who once more gathered to deliberate. The task of Middle-earth's protection now fell to the generations who had come after the heroes of the War of the Rings. The children of Aragorn and Arwen, the daughter of Elrond, would one day lead their peoples. In the halls of Minas Tirith, a new generation of leaders arose, their hearts still inspired by the tales of the brave fellowship that had destroyed the One Ring. Frodo Baggins, the humble hobbit who had borne the greatest burden of all, returned to the Shire with Sam, but peace was not to be found for him. The ring had left deep scars on his spirit, and despite the years that passed, he felt the weight of its dark influence still heavy in his heart. He sailed across the sea with Gandalf, Bilbo, and the elves, seeking rest and healing in the Undying Lands. Yet in the Shire, the memory of the War of the Rings would never fade. The hobbits of the land spoke of the heroism of Frodo and Sam, and their tales became legend. The Red Book of Westmarch was passed down from generation to generation, its pages chronicling the struggles and triumphs of those who had saved the world. But as the world healed and life began anew, the shadow of the rings, and the fear of what might come in their absence, lingered like a dark cloud on the horizon. The War of the Rings was over, but the story of Middle-earth was far from complete. New heroes would rise, new battles would be fought, and the struggle between light and darkness would continue, long after the One Ring had been cast into the fires of Mount Doom. For as long as the world endured, the war between the ring-bearers and the forces of darkness would echo through the ages, a story of courage, sacrifice, and hope in the face of overwhelming evil. And though the rings were gone, their legacy would forever shape the fate of Middle-earth. A new dawn. Though the echoes of the War of the Rings began to fade from the land, the forces that sought to undo the peace that had been so hard won began to stir once more. The new age of Middle-earth was born from the ashes of a broken world, but the future was uncertain. It was an age of rebuilding, of tentative alliances and lingering fears, and of stories passed down through generations. Yet even in the light of peace, shadows continued to grow, and the land was not as free from the spectre of darkness as many had hoped. In the years following the fall of Sauron, King Lesser, known now as Aragorn, sought to heal the broken lands and unite the people under one banner. His rule over Gondor was marked by wisdom and strength, but he had much work ahead of him. As the heir of Isildur, the weight of his ancestors' mistakes often pressed heavily upon him. The memory of Isildur's failure, of his refusal to destroy the One Ring, was a constant reminder of the danger that lay in unchecked power. Aragorn knew that Middle-earth's true peace would not come until the roots of greed, fear, and ambition were entirely vanquished. Yet Aragorn was not alone in his work. Legolas and Gimli, his steadfast companions in the War of the Rings, played vital roles in the restoration of their respective realms. Legolas, Prince of the Woodland Realm, helped to heal the forests ravaged by war, and under his leadership, Mirkwood began to flourish again. The kingdom, once dark and corrupted by the shadow of the necromancer, was now a place of beauty and light. Gimli, the son of Glóin, returned to Erebor, where the dwarves, under his guidance, began to rebuild their ancient halls and reconnect with their allies in the wider world. The friendship between the elf and the dwarf, once so improbable, became a symbol of hope and unity for the peoples of Middle-earth. As the years passed, Aragorn's reign brought a golden age to Gondor and Arnor, which was re-established as a kingdom in the north. The lands that had been torn asunder by centuries of war began to heal. The white tree of Gondor flourished once more, its blossoms a sign of renewal, and the peoples of Middle-earth began to rebuild their shattered societies. The memory of the War of the Rings, though bittersweet, became a rallying point for unity rather than division. Yet, even as the free peoples sought to rebuild, the remnants of the shadow Sauron had cast still lingered. Though the Dark Lord was gone, his influence had left scars upon the land that could not be easily erased. Rumors began to surface of a new power rising in the east, a mysterious force, hidden in the forgotten lands beyond the Sea of Rhûn and the barren wastes of Khand. It was said that this dark power sought to claim the legacy of Sauron, to forge a new ring of power and resume the war against the free peoples. Among those who answered the call was a young woman named Elendil, a descendant of the elves of Lothlorien, who had been raised in Rivendell and was gifted in the arts of healing and combat. She had trained under the wise Elrond and had long known of the ancient darkness that still lurked in the world. Alongside her came Halbarad, a ranger of the north and the last of the Dunedain, whose ancestors had long fought against the shadows in the wilds. Together with Legolas, Gimli, and Aragorn, they set out for the east, to uncover the Nameless's plans and prevent the resurgence of the Rings of Power. Their journey took them across the desolate lands of the east, through the wilds of Rhûn and beyond the plains of Khand, where the remnants of Sauron's followers sought to gather. Along the way, they encountered strange new creatures, twisted beasts and followers of the Nameless, who sought to delay their progress. But their strength was tempered by the lessons of the past, trust in one another, courage in the face of despair, and the belief that even in the darkest of times, hope could still rise. The deeper they ventured into the east, the more they uncovered about the Nameless, a once powerful sorcerer who had once served Sauron directly. He had learned the forbidden arts of ringcraft and sought to complete the work that his former master had started. His power was growing, but it was not yet absolute, for within him burned a secret. He was searching for the last uncorrupted ring of power, a ring thought to be lost in the depths of the world, buried beneath the ruins of an ancient kingdom. But as the fellowship closed in on the Nameless, they learned a terrible truth. The Nameless was not a man at all, but a being of far older origins, a remnant of the First Age, long forgotten, whose true purpose was not to rule the world, but to undo the very fabric of existence itself. The fate of Middle-earth once again rested in the hands of a few brave souls. The War of the Rings had been only the beginning. The true battle for the future of the world would unfold in ways no one could predict, and so, the new fellowship pressed on, unaware of the ancient forces at play, knowing only that darkness still lingered, and the light of hope could not burn out as long as they fought. The Nameless One. The fellowship's journey into the heart of the East was perilous, testing their resolve with each passing day. As they moved further from the familiar lands of Middle-earth, the lands grew more desolate, the skies darker, and the very air seemed to hum with an ancient malevolence. The warmth of their fellowship and the light of their hope became a fragile thing, but they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the rising shadow would only grow stronger if left unchecked. Aragorn, now a king, bore the weight of his title heavily. Each decision he made seemed to carve deeper into his soul, but his heart remained resolute. He had faced the greatest evils the world had known, first as a ranger, then as the king who had united the free peoples of Middle-earth, and he knew that if evil was to rise again, it would require the combined strength of the people who had already triumphed once before. Legolas and Gimli were ever by his side, their friendship stronger than it had ever been. The elf's keen senses and the dwarf's strength complemented each other perfectly, and together they fought off the dangers of the wilds, creatures that had never been seen before by any of them, dark and twisted by magic or perhaps by time itself. Elenial, with her graceful, sharp presence, guided them with wisdom, her knowledge of elven craft useful in deciphering the clues they uncovered. Halbarad, the Lone Ranger from the north, spoke little, but his actions were decisive and his courage undeniable. Their journey led them through the desolate lands of Rhûn, where once great cities had stood, but now only ruins remained. These lands were caught between the remnants of the dark forces and the growing strength of the free peoples, and the land itself seemed scarred. As they moved eastward, they encountered more followers of the Nameless One, sorcerers, warriors, and creatures corrupted by his dark influence. They were ever watchful, seeing in the fellowship a threat to the rising shadow. At long last, they reached the farthest reaches of the east, where the very earth itself seemed to groan with the weight of history. There, hidden deep within the mountain ranges and beneath the ruins of forgotten kingdoms, lay the Nameless One's lair, a fortress carved from the bones of the ancient world. The fellowship stood before a crumbling gate, the remnants of an age so old that even the stars had forgotten it. In the ruins of this forgotten kingdom, the Nameless One had found sanctuary. It was here that he sought to complete his master's work and wield the ultimate power, to forge a new One Ring, more powerful than any before it, one that would not only control the peoples of Middle-earth but undo the very nature of existence. They descended into the dark, labyrinthine depths of the ruined city, their way lit only by the faint glow of Elenial's elven lantern and the embers of Halbarad's fire. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed thick with an unnatural weight, and the whispers of forgotten spirits echoed through the stone halls. It was as though the very stones themselves remembered the magic that had once been wrought in these halls. At last, they found the Nameless One. He was not as they had imagined him, an old, withered sorcerer consumed by madness. Instead, he stood tall and imposing, cloaked in shadow, his eyes aglow with a knowledge older than the world itself. His skin was not of man or elf, but something between, pale and translucent, as if formed from stardust and shadow, something timeless and broken, and his voice, when it echoed through the cold halls, was like the deep rumble of thunder before a storm. "You have come far," he said, his voice carrying a dark, mocking amusement, "but you are too late. The One Ring may be gone, but there are others, far older than Sauron never knew. They cannot be destroyed, only wielded." He spoke the truth. He had found the lost knowledge of the rings of power, not only the One Ring, but the knowledge of how to craft new rings, stronger than any before, more dangerous than any before. He had uncovered a secret hidden by the Valar, a power that no mortal or immortal was ever meant to control, a power to unravel the very fabric of reality itself. The fellowship drew their weapons, ready for the battle that would determine the future of Middle-earth, but before they could strike, the Nameless One raised his hand, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The stone walls of the ruined city seemed to come alive, shifting and moving as though the ruins themselves were a part of him. His magic was ancient, older than anything the fellowship had faced before. The battle was not just against him, but against the land itself, as it seemed to shift in response to his power. Aragorn, with his strength and resolve, charged forward, but the Nameless One's power was overwhelming. With a wave of his hand, Aragorn's sword shattered, and he was thrown back, his body bruised and broken. Gimli, charging behind, tried to strike with his axe, but it too was deflected by the dark magic, and Legolas, though swift, found himself caught in illusions, seeing enemies that weren't there, fighting battles he could not win. It was Elenial who first saw the weakness in the Nameless One's power. His control over the city, the shifting of the ruins, was not an unlimited force, it had boundaries. She recognized that his power came from the depths of the earth, from the veins of an ancient, corrupted power that he had tapped into. The power to forge a new ring was rooted in the very core of the land, and if they could disrupt it, they could break his connection to it. "Legolas," Elenial called, knowing he would understand, "we must find the heart of his power." Legolas nodded, his elven eyes gleaming with understanding. With his agility, he leapt from platform to platform, navigating the shifting ruins to find the core of the Nameless One's influence. Gimli followed close behind, bellowing in his dwarf voice, trying to fend off the unnatural beast that lurked in the shadows. It was then that Halbarad, silent until now, made his move. With a steady hand, he raised his bow. The Nameless One had focused too much of his attention on the Fellowship, allowing one of them to slip past his magical defenses. Halbarad's arrow flew true, striking the Nameless One's heart with a blast of ancient force. The Nameless One howled in fury, and the magic that bound the city began to unravel. The Fellowship fought with renewed strength, and the city itself began to crumble beneath the weight of the Nameless One's collapsing power. But as the final blow was struck, the Nameless One's last words echoed through the halls: "The darkness will rise again, the rings can never be destroyed." The Fellowship stood victorious, but as the ruins of the ancient city crumbled into dust, they knew his words were true. The power of the rings, whether forged in the fires of Mount Doom or summoned from the depths of forgotten kingdoms, was not so easily extinguished. And as the Fellowship returned home, they knew that their fight was not yet over. The darkness that had once threatened to consume Middle-earth was gone for now, but the rings, whether of power or fate, would always linger, calling to those who sought to wield them. The War of the Rings may have ended, but the true battle for Middle-earth had only just begun.